All right. So today I wanted to talk a little bit about motion paths in Storyline 2. Storyline, as a software authoring program or e-learning authoring program, has been out since about 2012. And I'm curious to know from those of you on the call this morning or on the webinar this morning, before Storyline came out, how many of you, give me just a thumbs up or type into chat, were using Articulate Studio as your primary e-learning authoring tool? I'm curious to know. You can give me a green check or type into chat. Okay, so a few of you, and I see Nicole, you're typing. Using it for a while. Yeah. So before Storyline came out, I was using Articulate Studio. And for those of you unfamiliar with Articulate Studio is a PowerPoint plugin. And it allows you to author e-learning courses completely within PowerPoint. And PowerPoint is a really fantastic tool. I mean, there's a lot you can do with PowerPoint. But then Storyline came out in 2012 in a glaring omission. I mean, I think if anyone who started using Storyline, I think this was a glaring omission on their part. You know, it had basic animations, but it didn't have motion paths. And many people saw that as a disadvantage, including myself, in terms of the type of animations you can create on the screen. But Storyline 2 came out just this last year, and they, to everyone's not delightment, but everyone was very happy when they saw that motion paths were now included as part of Storyline 2. And I think what Storyline has done Articulate has done really well with motion paths and Storyline is they really went above and beyond just basic motion paths. I mean, there's a lot you can do with motion paths, and they work very similarly to how they work in PowerPoint. But Storyline and Articulate, I think, took them to a completely other level, which I'm going to show you some really cool things that you can do with motion paths and Storyline too. So, this past week actually, I got a Jeep. I just bought a Jeep, and I wanted an SUV that I can have fun with. So that's where this example came in. But motion paths and Storyline are really simple, and like I said, they work very closely to the way they work in PowerPoint. So if you already know how to do a motion path in PowerPoint, you're going to know how to do it for the most part in Storyline. So let me just start by showing how to do a basic motion path, and then I'm just going to build onto it and show you all of the different things that you can do with motion paths in Storyline. So, let's say I was creating an e-learning course and I wanted this Jeep to go across the road. If I were to do a motion path in PowerPoint, I would do it the same way in Storyline. I can move this off the screen, and motion paths are all located under the Animations tab. And of course, you have the entrance and exit animations, which, if you've been using Storyline, you're familiar with those. But of course, they added this new section for motion paths, and it looks very similar to the motion path option in PowerPoint. And there's several different types of motion paths you can add to objects in Storyline. All of them do the exact same thing. It's just a matter of the type of motion you're trying to create. They all have beginning and end points, but some of them move in some different directions. You can even do custom motion paths with different scribbles or curves or freeform to move in whatever direction you want. But in this case, if I wanted a simple motion path to have the item move on the screen, I just added it there, and you can see here it added this line. We have a starting point and an end point and a ghost image to show where that car or that object is going to move. And again, if you've worked with motion paths in PowerPoint, you've done all of this before, where you just move the the end position. Maybe I'll just have it drive entirely across the screen here, just like that. And that's a motion path, pretty simple. Now, if I preview this, you can see you can make the motion path. It just goes across the screen right when the timeline starts. Of course, there's several different options for the motion path. Let me talk about some of these, and then we'll get into some more cool things you can do with motion path. Of course, you can change the duration. That motion path or the car moved, really fast across the screen, so I can make it take a little bit longer. Maybe I want it to take 4 seconds to move across the screen. And you can see now, it moves across the screen at a more normal pace. And of course, there's several different effect options, or path options, which I'll be talking about here in a little bit. So that's really the basics of a motion path and how you create a motion path in Storyline. Now, where I think Storyline has really taken motion paths to a new level is how you can time motion paths. If you look at the timeline, Storyline's a timeline-based authoring tool. And if you've worked in Storyline before, you're familiar with timing the entrance and exit times of an object on the timeline. So I could add an entrance animation, and the car will come in at this time or exit out at that time. And the thing that makes motion paths really different from other types of animations is motion paths can actually occur at any time during an object's existence on the timeline. So let me repeat that again. A motion path can occur at any time during an object's existence on the timeline. But timing those motion paths is really interesting in Storyline. In PowerPoint, motion paths are all timed, all animations are timed chronologically. One thing happens after another. But with the timeline, you can have an object living on the screen for a certain amount of time and then have it move on a motion path at a later point. So let's say, let me delete this motion path and I'll put the car, right here in the middle of the screen. Let me bring this down a little bit so we can see it. And I'll add a motion path and maybe I want it to just, drive off the screen. Well, if I preview this right now, the motion path by default is going to occur right at the beginning of the timeline. But what if I had some audio narration and I didn't want that motion path to occur until maybe 4 or 5 seconds in? So timing motion paths is where things get interesting. So we're going to say we don't want this car to move until maybe the 4-second mark. Now, if you've never worked with motion path, let me ask this. Is there anyone, give me a green check if you've never done a motion path in Storyline before? I'm curious to know. Or type into chat. Okay, so a couple of you have never done motion paths. Very good. So what's interesting about motion paths in Storyline is that they're not timed necessarily with the timeline. Motion paths occur based off the use of triggers. And you'll notice here, there's a trigger here in my triggers panel. And for those of you who don't know what triggers are the instructions that you give Storyline to tell Storyline what you want it to do and when you want it to do it. So you can see here, there's a trigger that says move the picture, which is the car here, on motion path 1 when the timeline starts. So like I said, it's happening right at the beginning of the timeline, but we can edit this trigger to change when that motion path is going to occur. So I can open this up and I can change not when timeline starts, but I can do when timeline ends, or I can do when timeline reaches, and I can enter in a specific time, so maybe 4 seconds, which is cool. So let me preview that. And you'll see it'll stay there, and then in about 4 seconds here, it's going to start moving across the screen. So you can use that to time when they're going to happen. Now that's pretty cool. One other thing I'll show you real quickly about editing the timing of the motion path on the timeline is you can also do it based off of a cue point. And this is an added functionality in Storyline 2 that is new exclusively to Storyline 2. In Storyline 1 and 2, you could always add what are called cue points to the timeline, which are these, if I right click and create a cue point here, they're these little markers that you can add to the timeline. And they were typically used before Storyline 2. They were used as a little indicator, kind of like a reminder to yourself to say, hey, Tim, I want something to happen at that cue point, so I don't have to remember 5 seconds. Well, what Storyline has done is they've added options within the trigger wizard to have things happen when a cue point reaches. So I can say move the motion path on the timeline when the timeline reaches cue point 1 or cue point 2 or 3 or 4 or 5. I can do that. And what's nice about that is now that it's essentially tied to that cue point, I can move this cue point at any point in the timeline and it'll adjust when that begins. So let's say I move it down here to 2 seconds and I preview this. You'll see now that motion path will occur at 2 seconds versus 4 seconds. And if I were to move that cue point again, it would automatically update it. So I typically, when I'm working with motion paths, I'll typically do it with cue points because I'm bound to make some adjustments along the way. And I want to time it with other objects on the timeline. So I typically tie it back to a cue point. So that's the basic functionality of a motion path in Storyline. And you might already be doing that for a lot of your different animations. If you want to have, for example, I did a course once where I had several documents that represented different policies and they moved to different folders or whatever. You can use this basic motion path functionality to do that. And that's great. That is probably where the functionality that is most similar to PowerPoint stops. And that's pretty basic. But there's a whole other plethora of things you can do with motion paths in Storyline because you have the use of triggers. Because storyline motion paths are tied to triggers, there's a lot you can do with motion paths. So let me show you a different example here. Here's an example here. I just mocked this up where we have, this cannon, and I put a cannonball in here. I'll make it black at the end, but I left it blue so you can see what it looks like. And let's say I want to have this, cannon fly out of the cannon and, hit this wall here. Of course, I can add a motion path. Animations, I'll add a motion path. Maybe this time I'll do an arc motion path. And I'll just adjust it a little bit here. And we'll make it just go. How about right there? Of course, if I preview this, it's just going to move across the screen like that. And that's pretty normal. But as I mentioned in my last example, because this motion path is tied to a trigger, I don't have to do it based off of timeline event. I can actually make the motion path occur based off of really any other type of event in storyline that I have available to me. So I have a fire button up here. So maybe I make that motion path occur when the user clicks the fire button. So I can just edit this trigger here. And maybe we want to move the oval on the arc, but not when the timeline starts, but maybe when the user clicks something. So maybe when the user clicks, where's my button here? There it is, group 1. So now this motion path is tied to the user clicking that button. Let's see what that looks like. Okay, click it, and it fires, and it occurs, which is pretty cool. Now, of course, in this case, I might want to do some adjustments to the motion path. Maybe I want to click on it here. Maybe I don't want it to be so slow. I want it to move a little faster, and we have this easing here. So easing, if you're curious to know what easing is, easing allows the objects, the motion to ease in and out. So to make the motion path seem more natural. So I'll leave that in. I want it to ease in and out, and then I'll talk about some of these other options here in a moment. So I can actually tie the occurrence of the motion path to a button. Now I'm going to change the color of it to black so that we can actually see what it looks like. No outline. And again, that's a basic motion path tied to a button or a different event like a user clicking something. Now, another trigger that's available to me in Storyline 2 related to motion paths is I can make other things occur when a motion path actually ends, so when the animation completes. So I have this little explosion, this cheesy explosion, this boom here. Maybe I want that to appear once the motion path ends. And again, I don't have to make it happen on the timeline because, again, the motion path isn't tied to the timeline, it's tied to when the user clicks this. So after that motion path completes, maybe I want this to show up. So I've already added an animation to this to make it spin and grow, so it'll look kind of exciting. And I'm going to change the state of this to hidden. And I'm going to add another trigger here. And this trigger, once it comes up here, is going to change the state of this object, I don't know what to call it, the explosion, to normal, not when timeline starts, but we have a new option in Storyline, when animation completes. So when animation completes, and it's going to ask me to choose animation on which object. So it's going to be when the animation completes on this oval. And which animation? Well, it's going to be that motion path. So you might have more than one motion path tied to an object, which I'll show you what that looks like here in a moment. So I can select that and hit OK. And now it's going to change the state of this to normal. And because it has the animation tied into it, that spin and grow, it'll show that animation when this animation, that motion path, completes. So let me preview that to see what that looks like. Hit fire. Boom. And it shows the animation. Now maybe I want it to make this quickly go away. Of course, I can make this in the timeline. I think I have to make it. Let's see here. I think I need to do another trigger to make it back to hidden to reset. Let's see if that works here. Change state of the explosion to hidden when the timeline ends. Let's just do that on the slide. And we'll shorten this real quickly. And it should be able to go repeat over and over again. So we'll fire, boom, and it goes away. Fire again, and it goes away. So I can do that over and over again to create, whatever interaction. Maybe you're making a game. I have no idea. But the purpose of showing that is I wanted to show that motion paths can be tied to triggers as well, and you can make other things happen on the screen. So that's pretty cool. So let me show you another example where we can tie a motion path to a trigger here. And we can actually add more than one motion path to an object. So here's a simple, this isn't a real interaction, but I wanted to show it nonetheless. So here we have a box and we have two buttons, move to the left, move to the right. So what I can do in Storyline is I can actually add more than one motion path to an object. So let me add a motion path and I'll do a line, and maybe I'll have this one go to the left, and then I'll click the object again and add another motion path, a line, and have it go to the right. So you can see I actually have two motion paths moving in two different directions. And again, we have the triggers, and they're both happening when the timeline starts. That's not when I want it to happen. So I'll open up one of these and edit it. And we'll have it move this one, which is motion path 1, to the left when the user clicks, there's the left button, group 2. And then I'll do this one and have it move to the right when the user clicks the right button. So move the cue, when user clicks group 1. Okay, I think I did, yep, I did the correct one. Okay, so let me preview this. Again, this is no different than before. I'm adding more than one motion path to an object. But you'll notice in this example, notice what happens when I click the different button here. It moves back to the beginning of the motion path and continues. And that's not, maybe that's what you're trying to do, but you'll even notice if I click right again, it just repeats the same motion path. Now, maybe that's what you want to accomplish, but I want to use this as an example to show another feature available to motion paths, and it's something called relative start position, which I think is a really cool option in Storyline. So I have the motion path. They're moving in two different directions here. And if you've ever gone to path options, you might have noticed this option for relative start point and wondered, well, what does that do? So if I select this option and go and select relative start point, relative start point allows a motion path to be executed, but it'll be executed from the current position or the relative position of the object, wherever it is on the screen. So with that option turned on, let me show you what this looks like now. So when I click, if I click right, it moves right. But if I click left, watch what happens. It moves left from its existing position. It doesn't jump back and move. So it's moving, it's executing the motion path relative to where the object currently is. So I can move left and move left again, and eventually I can have it move off the screen completely, or I can keep moving it back, and it moves back. So that's what relative start point does. Now, when might you use that? I don't know. There's countless different reasons you might use that. I've seen a lot of different reasons, but that's exactly what that does. So let me show you another example of using the relative start point in a simple little game, if you will, that I've created. So here we have on this screen, I have, it says land the spacecraft, and I have me here in this little spacecraft, and I want it to land here. Well, I have these 4 buttons, and of course, as you know, I can add more than one motion path. So let me do that real quick. I'll add a motion path that goes down, and then I'll add a motion path that goes to the left, and then I'll add a motion path that goes to the right, and then I'll add a motion path that goes up. And just for the sake of demonstration, I'm going to shorten these a little bit. So I'm going to make them a little bit shorter so that it doesn't move so much. Of course, it's not going to be perfect, but you'll get the point. All right, so I have these 4 motion paths, and of course, as you know, I can tie them to these triggers. So I have these buttons down here. So we're going to move motion path 2, which is to the left, when the user clicks, and we'll do that left button there. That's my first one. I'll do my second one. Move the object on motion path 1, which is down, when the user clicks. Select the down arrow, that one right there. Do my second one. Move a motion path 3, which is to the right when the user clicks. That right button right there, there's that one. And then my final one. move the object on the motion path, which is up when the user clicks the up button. Okay, let me see what that looks like before I go any further. Now again, it'll move up. If I click down though, again, it starts from its origin, if you will, and I don't want it to do that. Maybe I want it to move relative. So again, I can go back and I can select that relative start point. I'm going to preview it now. And now we have a little game, if you will. Now, of course, I could build onto this and, require the user to actually try and land it there with some sort of trigger or state to make that happen. But you get the point. So you can actually create a little game here. I've seen people create little claw games, as if you had to move the claw around and pick something up. You can move this object all around the screen. Now, the possibilities for that are really endless. So you can create all sorts of different things in different games to have things move around the screen. I think that's pretty cool. So that's relative start point. So let me show you just a couple other quick things that I always like to do with motion paths. And actually, if you guys have any, oops, sorry, I didn't mean to hit my microphone there. Any questions, thoughts? I see, Nicole, you're typing. And thank you for the spaceship. All right. Let me show you one other thing that I like to do with motion paths, and this is kind of going back to basics with the motion path. But one of the other things I like to do with motion paths is I like to create what's called a repeating motion path, or a persistent motion path, if you will. And so I have this, I don't know, this is a game board for some game you're creating in Storyline. And I have these clouds here, and maybe I want them to just move across the screen just to create some sort of animation to make it look a little cooler. So maybe I want the clouds to move across the screen on it, but I want it to repeat. I don't want it to do one time. I want it to keep going in the background. So let me add a motion path to the object here. I'm going to have this move to the right. And actually, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move it off the screen. And I'm going to have this go entirely across the entire screen here. I'll do the same thing with this one. Add a motion path. We'll do a line, and we'll have it move to the right. Oops, there we go. And I'll have this move across the screen as well. All right, so let me just see what that looks like. They're both going to move pretty quickly. Well, that's not how fast clouds move. I don't like that. We don't want them to move that fast. So first thing I'm going to do is I'm going to change the duration. So maybe I want this one to take, I'll do something crazy. Let's do 11 seconds, and then I'll maybe make this one go a little slower, and we'll make this go 17 seconds across the screen. So let me see what that looks like. Okay, so that's pretty subtle. Now you notice it's speeding up and then slowing down. This one's speeding up and slowing down, and that's not really the type of effect I want. So one of the options I have that I can adjust this with, I mentioned earlier that speed easing, if you will. So let me select this one. There's this directional easing, so I can have it ease in, ease out, or none. So I'm not going to have it ease in because clouds don't do that. That's not very realistic. So let me see what this looks like now. Okay, so that's pretty cool. I might make them move a little bit slower, but you'll notice once it gets all the way to the end, it stops. That animation would be over with. But maybe the user is going to be on this menu for a long time, and I want those clouds to keep going around the screen. What I can do is I can actually make this motion path repeat, and it's not really an option in the motion path options. You actually have to do it with triggers. So we have this option, move the motion path when the timeline starts. This one moves when the timeline starts. I can add another trigger to this. We're going to move, let me find my clouds here, the clouds on that same motion path. It should just still be there, right? Line. I'm not sure why it's not bringing up my other motion path. I think that should keep it. I don't want to do a new motion path. What am I missing here? Let me actually just duplicate this one and edit it. So we're going to move the group on the same motion path. Not when the timeline starts or not when the timeline ends, but we'll do it when the animation completes. and when the animation completes on line motion path 1. So it's going to move the object on line motion path 1, and then it's going to repeat that motion path when line motion path 1 ends. So it's going to literally cycle through and repeat over and over again. Now I'm not sure why, it must be a glitch in Storyline. When I created a trigger from scratch, and it showed that same motion path option. I only have option to create a new one, so I'm just duplicating these. So move that on motion path 2 when animation completes here on the same animation. Let me see what this looks like. Okay, so they're going to move across the screen. Again, I would probably make them move a little bit slower so it's more subtle. But now we have some clouds moving across the sky, and it's just going to repeat over and over again. And because the clouds are timed at 2 different timings, they're always going to be in a little bit of a different position each time that motion path occurs. So again, I would probably make these a lot slower than they currently are, but you get the point. Now let me show you an example of when I've actually used that in a real course. Here's an example. Let me repeat this. Let me refresh this, This is an example I did for an e-learning challenge on the Articulate community. And I just wanted something subtle, and I wanted to move across the screen. So I added these, I don't know what you call them. They're just little, very transparent bars, and they're just moving across the screen. And I think there's probably 5 or 6 of them. And you can see as they move across the screen, and it just creates a subtle animation to make it look, a little bit more sleeker. And they just repeat. They're going to go across the screen, and it'll keep repeating over and over again. Another place that I used that motion path in this example, and it's kind of hard to see. I should go back and make it a little bit more apparent. But you'll notice around the open button, there's these little circles, and they're moving around the screen. And Nicole, I see your question about the font. I'll answer that in a moment. But you can see these little circles moving around the open button to bring some attention to that. And I'm not sure how well that's translating, but you get the point. Now, Nicole, you wanted to know about the font. Are you asking about this alter ego font? Is that correct? Yeah, that font is called Lobster. It's a weird name, but let me, Lobster font. It's called Lobster. You can download it for free, I believe. But I will tell you, it's really interesting. This font was really, really big towards the second half of 2014 and into 2015, and it's become a little bit of an overused font, kind of like Comic Sans. So many people started using fonts like this, but it's still a very popular font that you see all out there. And there's several similar ones, like this one called Penultimate. So yeah, Lobster. So that's an example of a repeating motion path. I have one other example I can think of real quickly. And let me go to, I think I have this posted on the ATD Tech blog. I'm not promoting myself in any way, but I just thought of this as an example that I wanted to show. Nope. I created an example to show how to use sliders, and I used a motion path in Storyline 2 when it first came out. Here it is. All right. So I created this example in Storyline 2. The purpose of this was to show how to do really sliders. But you'll notice a couple of things I have going on here. You'll notice I have this thing in the background. I don't know what to call it, but it's just some text scrolling across the back, and it'll repeat itself. But you also notice my next button here is actually pulsing, if you will. It's moving on a motion path. And all that is it's just 2 motion paths, one moving to the right, and then it moves back to the left, and it repeats itself over and over again to kind of create an animated start button. And if I click on this, it takes me in. I don't have the motion paths happening here, but you get the point. So there's a lot you can do with motion paths. You can have them repeat, as I showed here. You can have them have a relative start position and tied with triggers to move left and right. And of course, you can have other animations or other events or other motion paths occur once another motion path ends. So motion paths in Storyline are very versatile, and I think they've done a lot with it. And I think if you think about the market in e-learning authoring tools, I would say this is incredibly unique. to only Storyline. I haven't seen anything like this in any other e-learning authoring tool. So with that being said, that's my demonstration. We're ending, we got through quite a bit. So any questions, thoughts, anything you want to see else in Storyline related to motion paths? All right, and I see, Nicole, you're typing, so I'll give you a moment. Yeah, ease and out's nice. I use the ease and out a lot. It's good for making them, if you want it to ease in and out or not, it's all about making the actual motion path seem more natural. So with that being said, we're getting out a little early, so that's good for you guys. I hope you guys all have a good weekend. Hey, did you like that video? Make sure to check out some of our other great content at elearninguncovered.com.